Hey, this is Gloria Norwood, owner of Sophisticated Spot Shop on Etsy.com, owner of Gloria's Unsolved Mysteries Oracle Deck, Volume 1 through 40, and owner of Gloria's Astrology Tarot. And since we're at video number 200, okay, we're going to do some fun facts on number 200, because you know we from what? Africa. We from Africa. We from Africa. Okay, baby, we say, I want that Africa. You ain't from no Africa, you some Crenshaw mom. I'm sorry, that was my part. But it says, what is Africa? Africa has always held a strong fascination for those living outside its boundaries. For people of the past, Africa represents mystery, adventure, and even danger. Yet, as more of Africa was opened up, that sense of wonder only increased. The explorers returned with tales that were as fantastic as the myths that had previously surrounded this continent. Africa today remains a land of huge contrast. To talk about something being African is difficult because of all the differences that do exist within its boundaries, in particular its people and the land on which they live. It is thanks to the explorers of Africa that these wonders were first revealed to the rest of the world. And it says the wildlife for Africa. Africa has a vast number of animal species. Its rainforest contains primates such as gorillas, monkeys, and chimpanzees. The savanna of eastern and southern Africa have large herds of wild beasts, elephants, and zebras. The inland waters are home to the hippopotamus, crocodile, and huge flocks of birds. And it says, living on the edge of Africa. The diversity of Africa's population increased with the arrival of the new immigrants who originally came from Europe, South Asia, and Arabia. Like a Tunisian shepherd boy. So it's showing you a little shepherd boy right there. Aww. And then it says Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania is Africa's highest mountain, rising to 19,340 feet. The first Europeans to reach Mount Kilimanjaro were two Germans, Jonas Redman and Ludwig Kampf, whose tales of snow-covered mountain near the equator were not at first believed. Africa countries. There are 51 countries in Africa. They are very widely in size and population. There are over 117 million Nigerians, about half the population of the USA. And yet the tiny republic of Sao Tome and Principe has only about 120,000 people. The Sahara Desert is the largest desert in the world. It stretches from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east, and down from the shores of the Mediterranean to the Nigeria River in West Africa. Surprisingly, only 20% of Sahara is made up of sand. Some Sahara soil is even fertile. The people of Africa. Africa is a mosaic of 100 of different ethnic groups. This picture shows Maasai women. The Maasai are nomad people who live in the East Africa. Urban Africa. Although most people in modern Africa still rely on the land and live in small communities, there are many large cities on the continent. Cape Town, pictures here, has a large population of about 4 million. Lagos has 5 million, and there are 14 million people living in Cairo. Yes, they got the Nile, the Sahara Desert, the Atlas Mountains. So yes, this book is from... This is a scholastic book, which is very amazing. I love to, it says printed in the USA. First scholastic printing was January 2000. The publishers would like to thank Graham, Richard, Neil, Grant, Jan, Albie, and Elizabeth Wiggins for their assistance, and Dave Hobbs for his map of Africa. So yes, these are other people that put information together about Africa, which is very amazing, and it's by Colin Henson. So this is cool. It's a book, and it tells you all about Africa, and its contents on the left hand side. But yes, I'd love to learn a little bit about Africa. Okay, can't be a Black Panther without it, because you know he's from over there. So most definitely. It says early explorers of Africa. The exploration of Africa really began between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. The northern coast of Africa was home to two great civilizations before the arrival of the Romans, the Phoenicians and the ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egypt developed about 5,000 years ago. The Nile River was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. It flooded every year and covered the land with the fertile soil that allowed them to grow crops. The Nile also linked Egypt with the interior of Africa, but travel was difficult was difficult because the Nile was impassable in places, and the terrain east and west were inhospitable to travelers. The Egyptians needed to find alternative routes, so the pharaohs Shahura began to send ships along the East African coast in about 2500 BC. It was during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, nearly 1,000 years later, that the most important ancient Egypt voyage along the African coastline to the land known as Punt took place. Queen Hatshepsut, that's her name. This sculpture might look unusual because it shows Hatshepsut with a beard. After she became Queen of Egypt in 1489 before Christ, she dressed as a king and wore a false beard. So she is famous for the first woman in history whose name is actually recorded. She ordered the expedition to the land of Punt, for far to the south of Egypt. Arrival at the Punt. One of the main reasons for the Egyptian expedition to the Punt was to bring back myrrh trees. Myrrh is like frankincense and myrrh. Myrrh is used to produce incense, which was used in religious rituals. The location of the Punt is not clear, but as myrrh trees only grew in the area around modern-day Ethiopia and Somalia, most people now believe that they landed in Somalia. They returned to Egypt laden not just with myrrh, but with ivory, ebony, and slaves. The Roman arrival in North Africa. The great civilization of ancient Egypt began to decline in the years that led up to the birth of Christ. Much of northern Africa was conquered by the Romans by around 150 before Christ, and Egypt came under their control in 30 before Christ. This amphitheater at El Jejum in Tunisia is the third largest amphitheater in the Roman world. It was built in after death 230 and could hold 50,000 spectators. That means after Christ's death. The Roman rarely explored the continent, but a Roman expedition is said to have reached the Tibesti highlands in modern Chad and Libya. Queen Hatshepsut Temple. We know a lot about the Egyptian expedition to Punt because Queen Hatshepsut had the story of the voyage carved onto the walls of her burial temple built near Thebes at Deir el-Bahari. Many objects made from the raw materials brought back from Punt were put into this temple. We do not know when Queen Hatshepsut died. Sailed the Red Sea. Egyptian sailing boats were made by tying planks of wood together with rope. When rope gets wet, it shrinks, and this made sure that the planks were always tightly held together. For the voyage to Punt, the sails would have been made larger than usual so that they could use the south wind that blows from the Mediterranean. Each ship was about 69 feet long with a crew of 30. 5 ships set off on the voyage down to the Red Sea. They supposedly sailed close to the coast, and the crews always spent the night ashore. But some historians now believe that these ships were not capable of such a sea voyage, and that they came down the Nile. And it says, African A timeline. In 2500 BC, before Christ, supposed to be the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Shahur begins an exploration of the East African coast. Right, so it's literally giving you times and dates when all this stuff happened. Between 1489 and 1469 before Christ, Queen Hatshepsut is the ruler of Egypt and sends an expedition to the land of Punt in what is now believed to be Somalia. 600 before Christ, Greek historian Herodotus wrote writes of a voyage by Phoenician sailors right around the African coast. 425 BC, the Phoenician admiral Hannu begins his great voyage along the eastern African coast. 150 before Christ, Romans complete their conquest of North Africa. 1349 through 1354, the Batuta travels through Muslim Africa. 1445, the Portuguese sailed around Cape Verde, the western tip of West Africa. 1482, Diego Cao discovers the Congo River. 1485, Leo Africanus was born, or Africanus is born. 1488, the Cape of Good Hope. reached by Bartolomé Diaz. In 1497, Vasco da Gama sails around the Cape of Good Hope and the east of Africa coast. Yeah, that's something like my card. So like I said, the Bible stopped being written, so these cards would be great to lay out and see around what timeline things are happening between which sign. And you see how, like I said, the law of relativity, how it changes and go in reverse. This is what they mean, stuff like this. It just comes out in a different format. And then it says, setting off from Carthage. These ruins are all that remain of the great city-state of Carthage. The most famous of the Phoenician voyages were made from here by the Admiral Hanno in about 425 before Christ. He set sail with 60 ships. On board were hundreds of men and women. During the first part of the voyage, he found 6 colonies along the Moroccan coast. Hanno then continued to sail south with just 2 ships. He probably sailed up part of the Senegal River and then continued as far as Nigeria before returning home. The Great Muslim Voyager. In 1325, a young man from Tangier in Morocco set off to Mecca in Arabia. His name was Ibn Battuta. On the way to Mecca, he decided to travel over all of the known Muslim world, and so a great journey that took him nearly 30 years began. It is known that this time he visited Spain, the Middle East, and China, India, and Southeast Asia. He also explored the north of Africa, crossed the Sahara Desert to the Niger River in West Africa, and traveled as far as the modern day of Tanzania on the eastern African coast. Sailing on the Phoenician ship. The Phoenicians were excellent shipbuilders, building both warships as on this coin in a type of sailing ship known as a hippoi. It had a single sail, 2 rows of oars on either side of the ship, and a point bow that was used to ram enemy ships in battle. The ship was steered with the 2 large oars at the back of it on either side. A Papal Commission. Until Europeans began to explore the interior of Africa in the 18th century, most of their ideas about Africa came from one source. It was a book called The Description of Africa by Leo Africanus. Was his name, Leo Africanus, which was published in 1526. Leo Africanus was born in 1485 in Granada in what is now Spain, but was then a Muslim state. In 1492, the Muslims were finally forced out of Spain, and he went to live in Morocco. He worked as a diplomat in North Africa in the Kingdom of Ghana before he was captured by Christian pirates. He was given to Pope Leo X as a slave. Leo freed him and commissioned him to write his detailed survey of Africa. Early explorers of Africa. After the Egyptians, the next great explorers of Africa were the Phoenicians. These were people who originally came from an area known as Canaan in the modern-day Syria and Lebanon. They became great traders, and by 1100 BC, they were the masters of the Mediterranean. They are known to have sailed to the Atlantic and visited England in 450 before Christ. Their most important experts were timber, especially cedar wood, and a purple dye made from sailfish. The word Phoenicia comes from a Greek word meaning purple. In order to protect their trade, Phoenicians began to set up colonies in Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa. Their most famous colony was the city of Carthage in modern-day Tunisia. With the decline of the Phoenician Empire, there are few accounts of further exploration in Africa until the arrival of the Portuguese in the 15th century. A voyage around Africa. According to the ancient Greek historians Herodotus, the Egyptian pharaoh Nietzsche II hired a crew of Phoenicians in 600 before Christ to sail right around the coast of Africa. Herodotus wrote that it took the crew 3 years to make the journey. Every spring they landed and planted grain. Only after the grain had been harvested did they continue with their voyage. We do not know whether this is a true story, as there is no other supporting evidence. I like to learn, and I love me some history to see where we came from, right? The Portuguese in Africa. In 1492, Christopher Columbus managed to convince the Spanish mockers Fernando and Isabella to pay for a voyage across the Atlantic, so he was a scammer. He wanted a westward route to the riches of Asia, while Portugal was looking eastward. The Portuguese had been sailing along the coast of West Africa for some time. By 1419, they had reached Madeira. In 1431, they discovered the Azores. In 1445, Portuguese ships sailed around Cape Verde. By 1482, they crossed the equator and had sailed as far south as the mouth of the Congo River. When the Spanish discovered a new world to the west, it was believed that they had reached the Asian continent rather than American. This has made the Portuguese search for their own route around Africa more urgent. Ain't my fault he a scammer. Don't be don't be swinging Christopher Columbus. You was the first scammer, boy. You had somebody paying for your trip. Building forts along the coast. Look, he's like, I need a sugar mama and a sugar daddy to pay for my trip around the world, okay? First one to do it, okay? Building forts along the coast. The Portuguese were not interested in the interior of Africa. The whole continent was simply an obstacle on the way to the riches of Asia. However, they did build a series of fortified towns along the African coast to protect and supply these ships. The pictures show Fort Jesus in the Kenyan town of Mombasa. Meetings on the African coast. As the Portuguese sailed down the western coast of Africa, they found that many of the people that they met belonged to highly developed societies. This bronze model of the Portuguese soldier was made by a member of the Benin Empire. The people of Benin lived in what is now Nigeria. It ain't my fault. Look, Christopher Columbus wanted to slap somebody because I found out he had a sugar mama and a sugar daddy. And he wanted them to pay for their trip around the world. He said, I need a chef. I'm like, oh, he got demands, okay? Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry directed the early Portuguese exploration of the West Africa. He dreamed of launching a crusade to destroy Muslim North Africa. Oh, he wanted them. Finding a way to Asia would help to pay for this crusade, and at the same time will weaken the hold that the Muslims had over the trade in gold and spices between Europe and Asia. I told you it was about what? Resources, right? You know what I'm saying? It was killing people over resources for hundreds of years. Marked with the cross among the supplies that Vasco da Gama carried on his voyage were stone crosses called pedros. These were set in high grounds as markers for the sailors who were to follow them. They were also used to claim newly discovered lands. This cross is at Malindi in modern-day Kenya. And then it says, rounding the Cape of Good Hope. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz said, I never read this before, so it's interesting to me. And it's been on my thing for a long time. And one of my kids got it from school. I was like, this is very interesting. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz sailed around the southern tip of Africa. Diaz had lost sight of the land after a storm. When it became calm, he sailed north and found that the African coast now ran from west to east, rather than north to south. He found that the southern tip of Africa, almost by accident. Diaz called this point Cabo Tormentoso, which means the Cape of Storms. King John II of Portugal later rejected this name as too gloomy and renamed it the Cape of Good Hope. Arrival in India. It took another 10 years after Bartolomeo Diaz had discovered the route around Africa for the Portuguese to eventually sail all the way to Asia. Vasco da Gama set off from Portugal in July 1497 and guided by an Eastern African pilot across the Indian Ocean. He finally arrived at the southern Indian port in Calicut in May 1498. Nigga! It took this man a whole year to get to the other side. And they walked. Wait a minute. Lord Jesus. Help him, Jesus. It took him a whole year. You left July 1497. You ain't make it till May 1498. Lord Jesus. Oh, help him, Jesus. The legend, the president, you can tell they wasn't teleporting back then. At all. The legend of Preston John. The main reason why Europeans were searching for a seaward route to Asia was because the land route was controlled by hostile Muslims. There was a legend of a Christian king called Prester John, who ruled over an African kingdom just beyond Muslim North Africa. Portuguese explorers hoped to find Prester John and join with him to fight the Muslims. Wow. And then it says Africa a Timeline. 1526, the description of Africa by Leo Africanus is first published. 1768, James Bruce, the Laird of Kinnard, begins his voyage across Egypt and Ethiopia. In 1770, James Bruce reaches Lake Tana in Ethiopia, which he mistakenly believes is the source of the Nile River. In 1771, Mungo Park was born. In 1795, 17 through 1797, Mungo Park goes in search of the source of the Niger River. In 1813, David Livingstone was born. In 1821, Hugh Clapperton crosses the Sahara Desert to Lake Chad. In 1824 through 1828, Rene Caillie travels through the West African to Timbuktu. Wow, we got some stories put together, right? People didn't know all these people existed and trying to like basically redo what Jesus already did, right? The search for the source of the Nile. The search for the source of the Nile. He said, okay, you're going to try to be me. You ain't going to get there for a whole nother year and a half because you want to be me. I tell you about God, he funny. The search for the source of the Nile. The search for the source of the Nile had fascinated people for centuries. Ancient Greeks and Romans used the expression to seek the head of the Nile when they were describing an impossible task. It was long believed that if the source could be found, then all the rest of the mysteries of the interior of Africa would be revealed. By the 19th century, they needed to discover the source, become more than just satisfying people's curiosity. The European powers were beginning to expand their influence around the world, and the Nile was recognized as an important part of that expansion. Sir Richard Burton. Sir Richard Francis Burton was an interpreter English explorer. Like I said, I don't know every word. I'm gonna try. English explorer who traveled with Specky in search of the source. Apart from discovering Lake Tanganyika, he is also known for visiting the Muslim holy cities of Mecca and Medina in disguise. Sir Samuel White Baker. With a complicated river like the Nile, they were bound to be mistaken, claims by those who were looking for its origins. However, the expedition of Sir Samuel Baker did help determine where the Nile didn't start. In 1861, he followed the river. Okay, they is trying to do what God did again? Okay. He followed the river, right? He think he could tell God when the river started and where it stops. In 1861, he followed the river south and discovered Lake Albert Nyanza on the border of Zaire and Uganda. He found that the Nile just flowed through the lake. I just read a whole paragraph of stupidity. I swear, Sir Samuel White Baker, you gonna try to redo what God did. That's the second time. Okay, so it was a lot of people that had the God complex. Okay. Oh, Lord Jesus, help them, Jesus. For they know not what they do, Jesus. Okay. Meeting of the Nile explorers. The picture shows Specky and Grant meeting up with Sir Samuel Baker in 1863. The other person at the table is Samuel Baker's wife, Florence, and at a time when women were not expected to do anything even mildly adventurous, she traveled with her husband during all of his expeditions. She had married Samuel Baker after being bought by him at a slave market in Bulgaria. Oh man, now we see why everybody's all mixed up. Wait a minute, Samuel Baker. Oh Lord. Okay, so he bought Florence at a slave market in Bulgaria. Wow. Oh wow. Ancient view. So he fell in love with the black girl and married her and traveled with her. Wow. That's I'm still mad because never mind. These hoes is on sale. See, and that's what I'm telling you. That's a form of slavery. right? So if you're a cult leader, that's a form of slavery. And so you can understand that that's why that Osiris is here, because he gives people proper burial for freedom, so people can be free, so they don't feel like slaves. And if they feel enslaved and trapped in a relationship, boom, here come Osiris laying people down. I'm just saying. Ancient view of the Nile. This picture is known as the Ptolemy world map, although it was actually drawn in 1482, more than 1,000 years after his death. The Nile is shown coming from a series of lakes far to the south of the equator. Just below these lakes is a mountain range called the Mountains of Moon. Falls on the Blue Nile. The Nile is the longest river in the world at about 4,160 miles long. There are several tributaries that also feed the main river. This includes the Blue Nile, which starts in the highlands of Ethiopia, and the smaller tributaries in Burundi, Kenya, and Tanzania. About 1,863 miles of the Nile are navigable. James Bruce, Scottish aristocrat James Bruce, Laird of Kinnaird, set off in 1768 and traveled across Egypt and Ethiopia in search of the source of the Nile. Jesus fix it. This is another paragraph I gotta read. The stupidity. Okay. I'm just gonna do it. In 1770, he reached Lake Tuna in Ethiopia, which he mistakenly believed was the source. That's what you get. Trying to play God. God said, you gonna come over here? That ain't even the source. He had found the source of the Blue Nile, a tributary of the main river, and was not the first. A Spanish missionary had reached Lake Tuna over 150 years before. So you try to redo something somebody else did. You just got a doppelganger. He trying to redo something somebody else did. The Spanish missionary. I'll tell you about these copycats. Okay, they didn't understand what that meant back then. These copycat doppelganger people that want to be somebody else, dress like somebody else, do what somebody else already did and call it theirs. That's plagiarism. Okay? And now y'all gonna plagiarize the world. Y'all didn't do that. God created the heavens and earth. This is funny to listen to this. I can see why he thought to think it's funny up there in here. Alright. The source discovered it was the British explorer John Hannigan Speke who found the true source of the Nile. In 1856, Speke and Sir Richard Burton went to search for Great Lakes in Eastern Africa. In 1858, they found Lake Tanganyika. Speke traveled on alone after Burton fell ill and discovered Lake Victoria, which he believed was the source of the Nile. Lake Victoria lies, we know, within Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. He returned there with James Grant in 1862 and found the point at which the Nile flowed out of the lake. Okay, you still gonna try to do with God? I'm not about to play with these people. It says Mount Kenya. Mount Kenya is an extinct volcano in central Kenya. It is 17,058 feet high and is Africa's second highest mountain. The summit was first reached in 1899 by a party led by the British geographer Sir Halford Mackinder. And it says Africa's Great Rift. The Negro. I'm gonna have to do a second one of this. I know that for sure. Africa's Great Rift. The Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania is just one of the remarkable features of Africa's Great Rift. A series of faults in the earth have created a region cutting from the Red Sea down to Mozambique that is made up of mountains, volcanoes, valleys, and deep lakes. A branch in the east is named after John Gregory, a British explorer and geologist who explored the region in 1893. Then you have Gustav Nachtigal. Gustav Nachtigal was a German. Okay, that's why German was a German explorer who in 1868 was sent by the King of Prussia on a mission to Kanem Bornu, a powerful kingdom situated in the Lake Chad region. He was the first European to travel through areas of the Central Sahara in what is now Chad and Sudan. He arrived back in Cairo in 1874. I'm going to have to do a second one of this, girl, because this is juicy, but it's only like a few more pages, but you know I'm nosy because I got to be nosy because we need to know our history, right? It says, exploring East Africa. From the 7th century onwards, East Africa increasingly came under the influence of Arab traders from the Middle East. The Arabs built many towns and ports along the coast that were used as centers for trading and as a basis for sending slaves back to Arabia. With the arrival of Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama in 1498, controls of the eastern African coast gradually moved from the Arabs to the Europeans, particularly after the Arab fleet was destroyed by the Portuguese at the Battle of Diu in 1509. That's probably them riots and stuff. Any country that wanted to a dominant trade with Asia, and particularly India, had to be in control in the eastern African coast. By the end of the 19th century, this was meant to be the interior of the East Africa was explored, mapped, and claimed on the behalf of various European countries. As the power of Portugal declined, it was the British and the newly created countries of Germany and Italy that increasingly took charges of Eastern Africa. Lake Tanganyika. Okay, Lake Tanganyika is located along the Rift Valley. It is the second largest lake in Africa and the second deepest lake in the world. It is bounded by Tanzania, Zaire, Burundi, and Zambia. The first Europeans to reach Lake Tanganyika were John Hanning Speke and Sir Richard Burton in February 1858. At first, they thought they had found the source of the Nile. Joseph Thompson was a Scottish explorer who traveled over much of the eastern and southern Africa. He studied geology at the University of Edinburgh before leading an expedition to Lakes Tanganyika and Rukwa in 1798 through 1879 through 1880. 4 years later, he became the first European to cross modern Kenya. Sorry, it's just they got the writing over the water. It's kind of like, okay, why don't you put it on white paper like this, right? And then it says, they didn't have any fun facts on the side. So, and then it says, a Roman explorer. I kind of like doing the timeline last so we can know, little things that we missed out in our life. It says, a romantic explorer, Rene Collier, was inspired to explore Africa after reading Daniel Defoe's Robinson's Crusoe. He took up a challenge from the French Geographical Society to reach Timbuktu and return with an account of his journey. Collier started his journey in Sierra Leone, disguised himself as an Arab, and joined a trade caravan heading for Timbuktu. Remarkably, the fact that he could not speak Arabic and knew nothing of the Muslim faith aroused little suspicion. He eventually arrived home to a hero's welcome. So this person just snuck on some stuff. He couldn't even speak Arabic. I'm like, let me just get out of here. Let me throw on a little turban. I'm going to pretend like I know what's going on, okay? Contact with West Africans. All of those explorers met a wide variety of different people. In their travels in West Africa, the main societies were the Mandi and Akan groups who lived in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. The Fulani, Hausa, and the Yoruba peoples lived around what is Nigeria. There are many other groups throughout the whole West Africa, right? The Ivory Coast, where these mass come from, has over 60 ethnic groups within the borders. And it says Mungo Park. Mungo Park was born in Scotland in 1771 and trained to be a surgeon. He led an expedition to the Niger River, and after landing in what is now the Gambia, he traveled inland, going further eastward than any other European before him. He was captured by a local tribe and was a prisoner for 4 months before escaping. He reached the Niger in 1796 and turned back only when his supplies ran out. He returned 9 years later to explore the Niger by canoe. By this time, his expedition was attacked by local people and he was drowned. Wow. And it says, Africa, oh may God bless, and that could be one of the reasons why all these people is here, honey. Africa says a timeline. 1830, Richard and John Lander find the source of the Niger. 1835, the Boers began the Greek trade. 1841, Henry Stanley was born. 1848, Jonas Redmond and Ludwig Krapf discovered Mount Kilimanjaro. 1849 through 1852, Livingstone's first exploration of Africa's interior. 1852 through 1856,